I'm going to be the voice of Brian for a moment.
Well, I should probably convene the
Oh,
meeting.
you haven't convened this yet? No.
No.
You have the breath to convene?
Yeah, I think I can do that. Good morning. I would like to convene the land bank meeting for Friday, May 17th. And so we are in session, and I'd like to begin with Marilyn reading the land acknowledgement.
Let us acknowledge we reside on and care for the ancestral lands and waters of the Coast Salish people who have stewarded and called this place home since time immemorial. And let us honor inherent Aboriginal and treaty rights that have been passed down from generation to generation.
Okay, thanks, Marilyn. So we will start out the meeting with a general public comment period. And I don't have my screen up.
It's in front of you.
Yeah. I see a hand up, Norris Palmer. Welcome. Norris, can you hear us?
I think maybe that's just on the screen.
His hand has gone down.
Yeah.
Norris, you're muted if you're wishing to
I totally apologize. I just jumped in on the meeting. I didn't know the hand was up, but I do have a question. Where are we in this upcoming election? Where is the land bank? Are you going to go over the financials, where you are and what you hope to accomplish if renewed coming up in the future? Will that be discussed today, please?
We are doing a budget amendment later on today's agenda, so we will discuss those financials. And it has some specifics about our work program for the year. Lincoln, you want to add anything to that?
We are going to have financial projections, which will show where we're projecting to end up at the end of 2026, which is the current authorization period today.
Great. Well, that's wonderful. That tuned in late, didn't see the agenda, but appreciate the openness.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from the public? Okay, hearing none, we will proceed to the approval of the last April 19th meeting minutes. Any comments from the commission?
Looks good to me.
I had one.
Go ahead, Tim.
The copy I had said it was held here at San Juan Island Range.
Ah.
Oh,
Thank you.
Yeah. We put those in.
To make sure where it was.
Okay.
It's true.
You win the prize.
That was easy.
Thank you.
So noted. Any others? All right, if we have consensus, then the minutes stand approved. Okay, and is Vicky here for our partnership?
She's right up there.
Oh,
Good morning.
Vicky. Good morning, Vicky.
Good morning.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Vicki Edwards. I'm the Conservation Director with the San Juan Preservation Trust, and just have a few updates for you this morning, including that we had our annual meeting last week, our first one in person since before the pandemic, and it was really wonderful seeing many of you there. Thank you for attending and celebrating in another amazing year. And we did highlight a few of our projects with the San Juan County Conservation Land Bank, and those included the Lopez Hill Addition Conservation Easement, the Katy Mountain Conservation Easement, and then of course the North Shore project as well, which we're hoping to finalize with you all later this year. And so an update on North Shore is that Kathleen, the project lead, has been making some amazing progress on moving the necessary steps forward to get us to closing on that. She hopes to have the conservation easement draft by the end of June to Peter and Lincoln. She's also will be submitting the first round of billings to the Recreation and Conservation Office as the primary sponsor for the grant. The land bank submits those invoices for demolition costs and the cultural resource survey to the trust, and the trust submits those to the Recreation and Conservation Office for partial reimbursement, and we work that administrative side to get that done. And Kathleen's moving that forward with our operations staff. So you all will be seeing reimbursements for those costs later this summer. And then she is meeting with Peter next week to discuss signage and work on that. We also have a little bit of funding in the budget, the Salmon Recovery Funding Board budget, to help cover some of those costs as well. So exciting to see that move forward. Our summer social, speaking of the North Shore project, is scheduled on July 20th. It's a Saturday at the North Shore, and we're excited to get community members together and celebrate summer successes. And Lincoln, we're hopeful that we can connect with you and have you part of that, similarly to what we did last year. And then lastly, just wanted to share, as many of you may know, our illustrious Director of Communications and Outreach is retiring at the end of June, Craig Canine, and we are hoping to have his replacement in before he retires. We'll make sure to have introductions to all the folks that that new individual will be connecting with at the land bank, including you, of course, Tanya. But we're excited for Craig's next transition, but going to miss him greatly. So contact-wise, we'll, like I said, make sure to make those contacts for you all so you know who to connect with. And then for any sort of planning on openings for completed projects, the main contact right now is Kristen Buckley, our Director of Philanthropy. It's important for her to be able to invite the donors to help make those projects happen. So she'll be the main contact for those celebrations this summer and fall. And that's it for me. Thank you for the time to share about our cross-program work.
Great, and thank you for sharing, Vicki.
You're welcome.
Great. Okay, normally at this time we have the council update, but Councilmember Minnie had another meeting this morning and couldn't be here, so we will move on to the Chair and Commissioners' reports. Would anybody like to share?
I think it's always better to go first.
Yeah.
It's been a busy month. The Agricultural Leasing Committee has met with Lincoln and Charlie a couple of times. Charlie's been working like mad on the 2 agricultural leases for Beaverton Marsh and Fraser, and progress is definitely being made there. The Climate and Sustainability Committee, I'm a liaison for that. They have not met this month yet, but they've been busy. There's a new survey out for carbon emissions on the county engagement website. And we met, Peggy and Amanda and I and Aaron have met at least a couple of times, it seems like, on Whatmouth, figuring out details there.
Separate from the carbon, this.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. Good. All right, thank you, Tim. Anybody else?
Jim did a great report for me too, thank you. So yeah, working on the agricultural leases, and Charlie's been doing a great job on that.
We're
and
going
we
to
had
discuss that later, I think.
Yeah, we will talk about that later. Work party out at Watmo, which is really great. really good progress happening out there. And then discussions about the management plan for Whitmore. That's been really helpful. Amanda's doing a fabulous job.
Mhm.
And Charlie, I mean, not Charlie, but Cedar, great to have Cedar on board.
Charlie's doing a fabulous job too.
Charlie's already here.
Not only is that, but he's also working fencing at the Beer Marsh Preserve, like, sometimes by himself. And I see him often, and I just stopped and told him yesterday, I send you energy every time I drive by, hoping that helps. Anyway, it's really looking great. And Mike and I met with our small communications committee meeting, Lincoln and Tanya, and unfortunately, we missed you that one time. I'm most looking forward to seeing our annual report, which is coming out in about a month, I believe.
Ooh.
And that's our last opportunity to visit with our constituents until next year. So I think it's pretty important. I mean, this is something that everybody gets, everybody sees. This is
You're talking about the land bank's
the land
annual
bank's
report.
annual report will be going out in the beginning of
So,
June. I think.
Are we gonna get a chance to see that in draft?
That is Ms. Tanya.
The committee will, so we can pass it through. There is no, still at the designers right now, so there's no draft to show yet.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to have seen it before.
Well, the other thing I wanted to mention is that one of the things we came up with when our committee was meeting about the website last month was requesting a couple of changes. And I noticed that Tanya put in a quick links to hiking trails on the website, which is just great because now a person can just go in on the front page, they see that link and it takes you straight to the maps on each of the preserves where there are hiking trails. So thank you very much. This is a great simplification. Thank you.
Good. Okay, thanks, Marilyn. How about the online commissioners? Mike, Amy, anything?
No, Tim covered the ag subgroup that we were participating in on the lease in particular, and also the communication group that Marilyn talked about. So I have nothing to add.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I think, Amy, you were shaking your head. You're muted in any case.
Yes, I was shaking my head. I'm the delinquent commissioner of all of us with my overly full-time job. So one of these days I will have something more to report. In the meantime.
Okay, we'll look forward to that. Thank you, Amy. The only thing I have to report is that we did an Earth Day table a couple of weeks, I guess now more than a couple of weeks ago at the Orcas Earth Day Fair, and I gather that was the only Earth Day fair that happened in the islands. But Anne Marie and Tyler and I tabled at that fair. It was a fairly quick event, but intensely attended for a while, and we had some good conversations and made some nice contacts. This coming week, we have Orcas again has the Gathering of Eagles, the native canoe journey coming up and landing at Olga and Doe Bay. There's a 2-day festival. Wednesday is an Olga street fair, and on Thursday, the Lummi are moving on to Doe Bay and having some other ceremonies and meetings. But on that day also, Tyler and our own Jenny DeGroot are leading a hike around the Coho Preserve, and I guess an in-stream activity about the water in Cascade Creek and salmon spawning there, and what the land bank has been doing to try to encourage reintroduction of salmon in the creek. So I wonder, are any of the other commissioners and islands doing anything in the canoe landing?
Yes, so they are coming to Lopez on Sunday, spending the night. I am going to be helping with one part of it, the potluck kind of event, and Tim is going to be there shuttling people around.
Yeah.
So yeah, they'll be on Lopez. It's Spencer's Pit.
Great.
just for the night.
And on Sunday.
That's Sunday, 17th, yeah.
And then on Monday, they will move around to Odland Park briefly before
Yeah.
headed.
They're doing two, and then they're coming to San Juan after
Yeah.
that, I
But
think.
they're not spending the night at Auburn the second
No,
one.
no, they're
Yeah,
just
gonna stop
stopping
there.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they're coming to San, and I don't know of any participation by the land bank right now at the San Juan event, but I have it on my calendar to attend.
Good. Yeah. Well, I started out to attend as an individual too, and will, but I've been thinking about how to be there as an individual, but also as a representative of the land bank. That's why I'm wearing my T-shirt this morning. It's got to be some way to be identified as a member of the land bank, because I think that we want to make those connections and be visible to the public too,
Right.
as that. So we should think about that for future events too.
Promoting swag.
I didn't say it, but thank you, Anne Marie. And I didn't coach her either.
I don't know, we get those t-shirts.
Yeah, I don't know, that's great.
Those are something that the land bank had a long time ago, and I don't know what
I saw a
happened to
picture
it.
of Doug wearing one, but
But yeah, I saw that picture.
I think they're still fun.
I have a hat.
I have,
You have a hat?
I have a hat.
Yeah. Well, there should be more, I think. But I will just add, I just got my copy of the spring newsletter, Tanya, and I think it looks great. It's really nice.
Okay. Thank you.
I tried to forward it to a friend of mine, and somehow when you forward it, the pictures don't forward. You can't open. That's a technical thing that's beyond me.
And
So,
maybe
just
because we use that MailChimp software, usually at the bottom of the email, they offer you a forward to a friend, and that might be the way to do it and then it
Okay.
comes through completely.
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
just
confident,
forwarded the
but that's
email.
my guess.
Anyway, the newsletter I think looks terrific, and the listing of upcoming events is great. We have some turtleback walks and activities coming up next week, and a bunch of other stuff. So good job. Thanks for that. Okay, anything else from commissioners? Okay, if not, we will move on to the proposed 2024 second annual budget amendment. Aaron, you want me to take that?
Sure can. Thank you, Brian. I'm gonna share my screen and then I'll get started. Okay, here for you today. Coming to the Land Bank Commission pretty early in this Second Amendment process. Approval by the council for the Second Amendment won't happen until the end of August. But in order to get materials to the auditor staff so they can build the first touch, second touch, third touch with the commission or with the council, bringing this to you all today prior to June's submission to the auditor's office. It's just we won't have another meeting before that submission date is due. And the main theme and reason for this second amended budget and why we're on here is because we have to have finalized management plans attached to a budget to be approved by the council. And in this form, it's being done through an amendment. So I have it attached here in our management plans included. We have the Hauschka parcels, even though Katy Mountain is the one that we followed through on there. So we have project summary for Katy Mountain, Hauschka. We have the project summary for the North Shore, Glenwood, and then the management plan for Richardson Marsh that was approved at the last commission meeting. So that's the main emphasis of why we're why we're included here in the second amended budget. And also just did a little bit of housekeeping with the budget to bring some revenues closer to expected actuals by the end of the year. So we'll start off with the Conservation Area Fund budget numbers that we're changing here. As you can see, we have 3 different groups. In yellow, we have the adopted budget, which happened in December of 2023. The first amended budget happened in March, and the council or the county uses that as a cash adjustment period. You know, we're making these adopted budgets for the biennium a year prior to them going into effect. So it's really that first amended budget is kind of county-wide, department-wide, just housekeeping, beginning cash, ending cash adjustments, things like that. But what we're looking at here today is in blue. And the only thing that we're doing to the budget, like I said, is very light. We are increasing the expected revenue from the LGIP, which is our investment fund or savings account for both funds. We'll be making the adjustment here. And given the fact that we're already exceeding the $50,000 that is budgeted, that we set up in the budget, we're going to be exceeding that. So I raised that by 100,000 just to give a more projected actual of where we'll be. Like I said, just housekeeping in there. So added that $100,000 to LGIP, which then in turn, if you go down to the second section under expenditures, that's where total ending cash and investments is held. And you'll see the additional $100,000 added to our ending cash and investment balance for the end of 2024. So like I said, that's the only adjustment made to the budget itself. And then again, same thing here with the Stewardship Management Fund, same thing. We have made the decision to put more of our cash on hand into that fund, which will, with high interest rates, will really increase the amount of expected revenue from the local government investment pool. So same thing here, added $100,000 to that expected revenue. And then it is reflected in the total ending cash by an additional $100,000. When we come to the third amendment period for 2024, that's where, you know, we might have more adjustments made based on where we sit with stewardship projects. If anything needs to be added, any big capital projects that, you know, we're deferring, things of those nature. So at this point, again, the most important thing that needed to be included in this budget amendment was the inclusion of the Richardson Marsh Management Fund. So that's all there is for this one here today. I think with me being done here, it moves to questions.
I would love it because I look at this and I love little footnotes. I know way back that used to happen. I think we've talked about it before in terms of like, okay, total acquisition costs. Where you 276 and 2025 278. What are, I don't know what those are for. Is that interest on something? So just some,
Which fund are you looking at?
on the Conservation Area Fund, acquisition cost 276, and then for 2025 278.
Yeah, so the main thing there, and that's why the Hauschka Katy Mountain project summary is still included, is because that's attached to a promissory note where we're making $200,000 payments and interest to the Hauschka still.
Right.
So that's what that's for. Yeah, usually these things get a little bit more detailed if we have substantial changes, or at our quarterly financial reports, I kind of go in more depth, but given the fact that this was really a minimal change of, you know, nothing else was changing here except interest. So given that nothing else has changed, and we, you know, I'd spoken about it a few times, I felt like I would keep this name simple, but you know, even when it's simplified like this, you know, there's always room for, you know, what do we want expanded? What do we want to talk about more?
Well, yeah, I don't know if anybody else kind of looks at it and goes, oh, what's that about? And I realize those are small numbers, but, it's just helpful.
I think anytime you can make it easier for people to understand what's going on, we should try to do that if it's not too cumbersome.
Yeah, and that's kind of the tricky part, right? Sometimes, you know, if we expanded each of these to show every line item, it's inclusive and some people see it, but then some people see 200 line items and get lost in it. So it is
Right.
definitely a balance, and we're always working on making that easier for the public to see and understand, especially when we are making changes in those categories.
You know, the little memo that you've sometimes included, Aaron, often included with your budget reports, I found to be very helpful in that it helps us focus on what the changes are.
Okay.
And I think this is great, and I appreciate the colorful budget. This is the most colorful budget I've seen, and it's basically, as I understand it, it's a good news budget. Our investments are doing better in terms of interest, so.
Yep.
Great.
What is the interest rate?
Well, 5.4%.
Wow.
Yeah, good news after a long time.
Yeah, we are seeing, you know, hundreds of a percent change monthly in, like decreasing. It was around 5.45 at the beginning of the year. Now I think it's like 5.43, 5.42. So we are starting to see a little bit of the regression in the interest rate, but it's still very strong.
Say, Aaron, this is Mike Pickett. Quick question for clarity. The conservation area REIT, 4,059,000. Of that, down below 3,094,000 is going to stewardship. Is that right? Is that how we look at it? That 3,000,009 is basically REIT funds for stewardship?
Yes, correct. Total transfers to stewardship. Yes, that is
right.
our.
So we could basically say 75% of the REIT is going to stewardship this year.
Yes. Yes.
Thanks. That's just for clarity. I think it's an important understanding for folks to know. Thanks.
Any other questions, comments from commissioners?
I have a question. Is that possible?
Not at this point. This is, we will have another public comment period at the end of the meeting. I'd like to leave it open to commissioners.
Just one, as everybody knows, I'm really interested in the percentage of the REIT that we're spending on stewardship, and it's not clear in our typical financial statements, of which this is not one. This is not one of our regular financial statements. But thank you for bringing up that transfer, because I think that's one of the really important things that we need to focus on is what the stewardship costs of our preserves.
Yes, I do believe after we wrap up the budget amendment, we will go into the projections through 2026, and we can open more discussion on the nitty-gritty there if you like.
Okay, Commissioner, anything else? I have one question, Aaron, and I apologize. I meant to call you up and ask you about this yesterday and didn't get around to it. But in the Stewardship and Management Fund, under the expenditures, the First Amendment and Second Amendment columns, well, actually, the bottom line total expenditures for stewardship and management, we have a $100,000 difference there. Otherwise, the numbers are the same. The cash investments in the first line under the First Amendment and the Second Amendment are the same amount. What I'm saying is the numbers The numbers up top in the column are the same, but the totals are different. Is there a mistake there?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're right, I didn't adjust the ending cash,
Yeah.
total to 7.6
Okay,
million. That's
before you send it to council.
correct.
And what I'm understanding is that this needs to go to council early, but we will be having a public hearing on this, the budget amendment in August.
The council will be. This is for approval of the expenditure and acquisition plan that we will recommend to the council.
Okay.
So we are having our public hearing on this budget amendment here today.
This is a public hearing.
Yes.
Okay, it's not listed as one.
It is.
So I just have a question about that process, because this is, I haven't been involved in public hearings with the land bank yet. What is our advertising requirement and how do we meet it?
So it is 3 weeks, and I advertised in our local papers, which is required for public hearings for 3 weeks prior to this meeting.
Okay. So
Yeah, it doesn't really get the public informed, but I understand that that's the requirement. Thank you.
if that is the case, I will now open the public hearing and take Mr. Palmer's question or comment.
Okay, thank you. On these investments, who's taking care of these? Are they put with an investment firm, or is there government controls on them? Where is all that money invested, please?
So the local government investment pool is managed by the treasurer's office, and there are restricted opportunities that local governments can invest in. You know, we can't take our funds and go invest in Tesla or Bitcoin. These things are regulated amounts, and the land bank itself does not regulate the local government investment pool or manage those funds. Since we currently don't have any treasuries or bonds, which are options for the land bank, in addition to the local government investment pool, at this time, we don't have any. So all of our funds are managed in the local government investment pool, which is handled through the treasurer's office.
So you're not into things like T. Rowe Price, or what normal people would invest in? It's all government?
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you for answering that. That's all I had.
Norris, we're restricted by the state constitution in how we can invest our funds, and it's a very limited number of things that we can actually invest. So the local government investment pool is something that all local and county governments are putting money into. It's managed by the state. We can also do treasuries, things like that, but it's really very limited. That's been one of our big problems in trying to have a so-called stewardship endowment, that we can't manage that fund as a private entity would, an endowment fund, and invest in riskier, but things that might yield a much higher return. So we've been through this very long period with the last recession where we were extremely limited in the interest income that we could earn. So we were far under 1% for probably a decade, but honestly, it's just a difficult situation if you're trying to fund something going forward.
Roughly how much a year does the land bank take in home sales, roughly a year average? I mean, it's a revenue, right?
Yeah, that varies obviously by from year to year. So there's no great average. It all depends on what's happening in the market, how many sales there are, what the volume and the extent, the actual amount of those sales. So it's very quite a bit. Are we going to show the table?
Yeah.
So we've got a table coming up, which you can take a look at, which will show you over the last,
10 years.
I think 10 years.
Yeah.
It'll give you a clear indication of where our REIT revenue has been and also about our stewardship funding over that, or stewardship expenditures over that period of time.
Now, when you say stewardship, what does that cover?
Stewardship covers everything we do on our preserves. It covers monitoring conservation easements. So anything that's in that vein falls into the stewardship category.
When you say monitor conservation easements, what does that entail, please?
All of our conservation easements are monitored annually. So we send a staff person out with a conservation easement and photo points to take a look at the property. Hopefully the property owners there, we can talk to them about what's going on and note whether there are any issues with the easement.
What issue could you have with an easement, please?
Someone could, it all depends on what's in the conservation easement, but for example, there could be one which limits the number of houses that can be built on a property, or whether it can be subdivided, and it's possible someone's built a house or tried to subdivide a property, things like that.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. Are there any other questions from the public during the public hearing? All right. If there are no questions, I'm going to close the public hearing, and I'll ask for a motion of approval on this budget amendment.
So move.
And I'll second.
Second, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. First budget amendment is second budget amendment, I'm sorry, is approved to send to council. Thank you.
Okay. So I will continue with financial month at the Sanborn County limits.
Okay.
We are going to now take a look at projections. So I will share my screen again. These are the projections going through 2026, which is our current authorization period. This is something we tracked a little bit more in the past when we had a longer outlook to get to 2026. And now that we are extremely close to 2026 in that authorization period, I'm going to try and get a better view here and see if I can. So remote Zoom screen, pretty nice. Okay, yeah, that captures at least the whole first one. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so this is just projections with the ultimate goal of showing where are we going to be sitting at the end of this current authorization period in ending cash. How much money does the land bank have at the end of this period? And what we have here in gray is the 2 previous years. In yellow, we are showing current budget 2024 with also a projected 2024. And the reason we have this projected line here is so throughout the year, I can use it as a planning tool for amendments. Also just, hey, this is where we ultimately think we'll end up. And then 2025 and 2026, so the final 2 years on that in this reauthorization period. So when we kind of go across, taking a look at tax revenue, let's see, investment interest, conservation buyer program, sale of land, some of those are, fixed numbers. We have an idea of what we're doing. With the tax revenue, we kind of attached a 3% increase year over year, just so we can, have something in there show growth. And those are always adjustable. And again, these are just projections, but for instance, conservation buyer program, sale of land, if you're looking at that big number, $1.7 million number in 2025, that is just for the conclusion of the deal and the conservation easement with Preservation Trust.
For North Shore.
For North Shore.
For North Shore.
Yeah, that's what's left there on their end of that deal. That's due by the end of 2025. And then we don't have anything specific in terms of sale of land projects that are important to have included in here at this point. So that's just projected out there at 2026, with the main numbers just being tax revenue and interest revenue at this point. The grants for 2024, those are for Watt Mile addition that we approved to move forward on. So we'll be accepting those this year, along with the $250,000 for potential water rights grant on Orcas. So that's revenues looking out, and then administrative costs and expenditures. Again, we really just attach a 3% increase year over year on those, along with some fixed numbers like bond payments. We know what those are going to be all the way out because there's a debt schedule. And then same with the loan debt service for the stewardship fund, which is where we use $3 million from the stewardship fund in order to make that acquisition happen with Glenwood, and that is on a debt schedule also with $1 million for 3 years, and interest is and that's a controlled number too. We weren't able to just say, hey, let's pay that back with 5 or 6% interest. We had there's rules involved in how much interest you can attach to an interfund loan, and that is the local government investment pool interest rate plus 0.75 points. So that's how that's calculated.
Can we ask questions during your presentation, or would you rather we held them till later? I'm happy.
How about I just finish up the ending cash numbers, and then
Sounds good.
We can go back for sure. So projected through 2026, we're seeing an ending cash in the conservation area fund projected at 7.1 million. And then we take the same approach with the stewardship management fund. We have our beginning operating cash, beginning endowment funds, and the transfer amounts along with interest rate and the fixed interfund loan principal and interest rates. Those are kind of hard baked in there. In terms of transfers to the endowment, that's set at the constant 500,000. The transfers for operations, as you can see, have been trending up. We continue upward through projected stewardship activities through 2025. And then we just know that with a lot of the preserves that we're opening right now are heavily public access oriented, which just take a lot of money, a lot of capital expenses there in getting some of these open. We figure we would drop that down a little bit in 2026 just because the state of current preserves and where they sit and where projects intend to end. We don't see a 3% increase over 2025 in stewardship spending. It'll still remain on an upward trajectory compared to previous years, but more than likely it will scale back just a tad. So that's why you see revenue for transfer to operations and stewardship decrease there in that final year, 2026. And then we see as an ending cash number between so ending endowment funds. Okay, so that's a little bit mixed up, but we're looking at around $8 million in ending cash between the endowment and operating cash in 2026. So if you take the total between both funds, we're sitting around $15 million in cash by the end of 2026. And this doesn't account for any acquisition projects that may or may not happen between now and then. There tend to always be, there's things on the radar, but nothing we can really attach numbers to. And then the more, hypothetical numbers we throw in there, it's not necessarily helpful. So overall, this is just a picture. If we weren't to acquire any more properties, that's where we'd be sitting at the end of this authorization period in 2026.
It also includes REIT and REIT projections, and as you might imagine, we're running behind on our current budget, so we're not sure where those numbers are going to end up either.
So that's it. Questions?
I have a question about interest income. You've projected same revenue for 25 and 26. And I wonder if that's realistic.
It is pretty hard to say. I do think that even though we did increase our projected revenue from interest this year by $1 million, I honestly think we'll probably exceed that this year, given where we're at. So with the potential of either leveling out or slight decrease in projected interest rates, moving forward, there are some financial newsletters that I do follow to see where the Fed stands and who thinks it's gonna,
who knows?
Who thinks it's gonna sustain this level or drop? So I have a little bit of an idea of kind of the idea is more of a leveling out, not a huge drop at this point. So I'm really just kind of accounting for subtle drops, but knowing that we will be adding money into these accounts at a specific rate with an interest rate potentially dropping a little bit, it might hold steady around that number. I'm pretty confident with that number at this point with how much money
as we've discussed, the more we can keep invested, the better off we're going to be.
Yeah.
And that's pretty critical right now.
Yeah.
Question about the Turtleback bond is paid through 2036.
Correct.
From conservation
futures.
Conservation futures.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is a separate item. And then I just wondered, I see dropping off in acquisition costs, I see the $200,000 for Hauschka is paid off in 2025. What's the remaining 79,000 expenditure in 26 for?
Where are you?
2026 acquisition costs out of the CAF.
Okay, so there is a portion of administrative costs that are attached to.
Yeah. It's
acquisition costs.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I don't see a line item here for what we get from the conservation future.
So it's lumped into tax revenue.
Okay.
That's just a combination of all of our tax revenue, conservation futures tax, leasehold tax, timber sales tax, and real estate excise tax.
So do we know what we get average, or what are we getting this year from the conservation
futures?
Futures
360,000.
And that's kind of pretty constant. Is that correct?
Yeah, it goes up about 30, $20,000 to $30,000 a year.
Okay.
It's really important to note with the conservation futures levy, that was something that was bonded back in 2006 for the purchase of Turtleback for 30 years. So that bond runs through 2036. We have some remainder, which is beyond the amount that's owed, which has been running about 100,000 a year, maybe this year. It's also important to note, though, that conservation futures monies are restricted in how you can spend them. So the state, and that's by state RCW, so 75% of that revenue has to go toward acquisitions. Only 25% of that can go toward stewardship.
So we have $75,000 a year through 2036 that has to go to acquisition.
Well, we have about 100,000 since we're paying off that bond that basically covers our acquisition part of conservation futures.
So right now we don't have.
Right, but yeah, it's we're just getting a very limited amount that can go towards stewardship in any case.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions from the commission?
No,
Aaron, you want to continue with the revenue chart?
Yeah, sure.
So I think we'll answer Mr. Palmer's question.
All right, so this is another look at what our real estate excise tax revenue over the past 10 years is compared to stewardship spending. So this is dollars for dollars. In blue, the blue columns that you're seeing is our REIT revenue over the last 10 years. You can see that from 2013 to 2019, it was pretty consistent increase at a kind of expected rate. And then you see the giant 2020, 2021 numbers. Those were during COVID, where it was a huge buying frenzy here in the county. Interest rates were really low. People were buying a lot of second homes, get away from everything. And you're kind of seeing in 22 and 23 a little bit of normalization back to pre-COVID trends. So as you can see, there's a little bit of a leveling in the trend line for, where's that come from? A little bit of a trend line there is kind of coming back down to normal. In 2023, we were about 4.5 million. And then more important, and then also to go along with this, you're seeing the trend of stewardship expenditures, and this is operating. This number is based off of the actuals for spending in stewardship for each year along the way. So as you can see from 2023 upward, we have increased the amount of spending in stewardship year over year. A lot of, where you do see a little bit of decrease in 21, COVID, things weren't moving as fast. It was hard to get projects done. It was hard to spend money. In 2021, we got a lot done, but it was more internally, it was more our staff contracting levels just weren't as high. Capital projects and expenditures just weren't as high. So although we got a lot of work done, it wasn't, it's just an outlier year. So you kind of take that year out of it and you see this trend up to 2023, where 46.43% of the revenue, the REIT revenue that we received was spent on stewardship.
I got one more question. This is total expenditures from the stewardship fund, isn't that right?
Yes.
So one of the things that we don't see here is that includes capital improvements to the preserves. And as we hit a high on that, the proportion is going to be higher. But if we are not acquiring as much and therefore not doing as much capital improvement, I'm not saying the rest of the maintenance program would change, then that proportion would change, or that gross amount would change.
Yeah, I mean, capital improvements are pretty high right now with opening new preserves. Once we get beyond that, there's still, we had new preserves, so we might not be increasing the amount of capital projects, but the amount of restoration and management projects
Right.
will increase.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. So capital improvements are not included in the stewardship budget?
They are.
They are.
They are.
Oh,
But because they are, and because they reflect to some degree acquisitions, if acquisition level changes, then the capital improvement level may change, which isn't to say that the rest of the maintenance budget is going to change.
yes,
Because as Aaron points
Gotcha.
out, we have more properties to maintain.
yeah.
Yeah,
Good point.
capital projects are always higher, at the beginning of a new acquisition, for public access, for whatever, whatever we need to shore up right out the gate, but, yeah, as mentioned, and, you know, I think the point I was bringing up was that even though, yes, we've acquired some new properties and spent a lot of money on capital expenses, it doesn't mean that we won't be spending a lot more now on management and maintenance and contracting. It will just shift into a different category.
Capital is initial money,
Right,
one-time expenditure.
right.
Yeah, I find this a very useful chart in illustrating our budget trends, because what it says to me is that currently our REIT revenues are trending downward, and our stewardship expenditures are trending upward and becoming a greater portion of our funds and our effort by comparison with land acquisitions. And I think that does represent the trend for the future, and it's an important one. Yeah.
Right, Amy had her hand up, but she took it down, so I'm not sure.
I'm sorry, who?
Amy.
Amy, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I actually had a question. Here, I can turn my camera back on. Thank you, Aaron, for you're like a wizard at spreadsheets. I'm always so impressed. And I agree with Brian, this is a really helpful chart. And I guess the question I had was, I recall that the enabling legislation of the land bank has a cap on the amount of the REIT that can be spent on staffing costs. And I guess I was interested in the sort of interplay between this increase in the stewardship spending and that sort of cap, and if there's sort of a tension there, if you see, or if you if that is coming into sort of your thought process. Thank you.
Yeah, I understand the question that you're asking. You are correct. We can't exceed 10% in administrative costs in total expenditures by the end of the year. And the way we're getting around that with additional, by adding more preserves and more land and more property, more management, more maintenance, is utilizing contracting, partnerships, you know, ICC, YC, all the CCs out there, WCC, you know, Conservation District, you know, DNR, all these different partnerships that we have, and just local volunteers allow us to continue to get a lot of work done. But it is a number, that 10% is a very important number. You know, we can't just go out and add 4 more positions to our staff, especially with, you know, the way REIT is trending. It is something that, you know, Lincoln has to keep an eye on and really keep in the back of his mind when, you know, he's balancing workloads for everyone. But contracting is probably the biggest solution at this point.
We are capped at 10%.
Thank you for that, Aaron. Appreciate it.
And I was just looking at this chart recently. I can't remember where it was, but it seems to me in the past few years, we've been at something like 3.5%. And
it's low. So there are a number of different variables at work here. So in terms of administrative costs, we're really talking about running the program. So that's me and Aaron and Tanya. Part of Tanya's time and my time also go toward stewardship. But those administrative costs have really remained fairly steady. They've increased with inflation over time, but we have not added administrative staff. This is something that has become fairly an interesting conversation with the rest of the county, where they're very interested in having more administrative capacity. For example, a deputy director, that would be something that we could do. But because of our cap, that's not really an option for us. In terms of stewardship spending, the stewardship staff are not part of those administrative costs. They are out there actually stewarding property and doing those things. So we have more flexibility in adding staff in those areas than in administrative areas.
I would just say that if our admin costs are right around 3% somewhere, that's extraordinarily low for any organization. And we're very efficient.
Yeah, I think the 3%, you look at years like 2021 where our REIT revenue was almost $7 million. That's going to keep that administrative costs low as well. And same with 22 and 20. Those were extremely high years, over $5 million. So I think, I think on average, our sweet spot is probably around 6%.
And it's percentage of REIT, is that correct? I just wanted to verify.
Revenue.
Of all revenue.
Yeah,
So that
grants.
grants, it
Yeah,
across all,
donations.
and that's a different question. Thank you.
And I will say that we have gone over that 10% on a few occasions, particularly during the last recession, where our revenues just dropped precipitously. We were not wanting to cut staff. It seemed pretty short-sighted, and then revenue started to come up. So over the life of the program, the average has been 6%.
Right, I've seen that. Thank you.
Peg, did you have a question?
No, that was it.
Okay. Anything else from the commission? Okay, Aaron, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So
As,
Norris has his hand up, but you might just want to address that.
I do have a question, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Okay, we've got an election coming up here soon that'll either continue or discontinue the land bank and its operations. I have a question for you. What would be the impact of a non-renewal vote, number one? Number two, what would happen to all these monies, lands, and all of it should this thing come to an end? Do you have a plan?
Norris, I'm going to interrupt you here. This is not a public comment period. If you'd like to hold on to it and ask us at the end of the meeting, you're welcome to do that. Thank you.
Thank
We're
you.
going to move on now.
I would just add that we are going to be talking more about that at the next meeting.
Yeah, and he can ask the questions at the end.
Yeah, I just said that.
I'm not sure if you heard it.
I don't think you hear it.
Because he was responding. He was
Could you
talking.
repeat that? Can you repeat it?
Okay, Norris, in case you didn't hear me, we will have another public comment period at the end of this meeting, so you will have a chance to ask that question.
Okay.
As Lincoln points out, we're going to discuss that in detail at the last meeting. By the way, all of these budget budget figures that were shown are part of the public record. It's in the land bank meeting materials. So,
Thank you.
okay. Thank you. We will move on to the director's report. Lincoln.
All right, I've got a few items for you. Marilyn asked that I actually revisit the presentation that was made to council by the consulting group who was working with the Trust for Public Land on the attitudinal survey of county voters toward conservation issues, and specifically toward this question of reauthorization. So Aaron, if you can pull that up.
Which one first, the land bank meeting 5.7 or the other one?
The other one.
Okay.
We're just discussing voter priorities.
Yes.
And can I just clarify that I thought this was important information for us to look at because we never get this kind of information. This was done by an independent contractor And it tells us a lot about what people in the community expect from us and other conservation organizations. So I think it's worth just sort of reviewing it.
And this was presented to council, when, I don't remember the dates.
Yeah.
Probably 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember actually the specific date this was presented to council
I
either.
can look it up.
Pages
Um,
18 and 19.
In any case, we're just gonna take a quick run through this. I think probably most people, at least on the commission, had an opportunity to look at the presentation that was done by the consulting company, but let's just work our way through these. I'm not gonna get into any of these detailed questions about methodology or any of that, so let's keep skipping forward.
Pages 18 and 19 are the pages that refer to conservation values.
Okay, so let's just
That's
keep
of interest.
going. So there, hold on, just
Okay, I
one
don't know.
question. So this is one of the things they're doing here, or the principal thing they're doing, is really asking the question about this potential ballot measure and where people fall in their level of support for a ballot measure to extend the conservation area REIT. And so this is the question that was posed to the public. I won't go through it, but if you go on to the next slide, you can see that initially there was a 62% level of support for a measure, basically cold, when you first asked this question of, and this was 400 registered voters who were chosen at random. So it's a good sample of the county. So that's.
Were there numbers attached to that? I can.
Numbers attached to what?
To those figures. So we have percentages, but as we know that the number of Democrats as opposed to Republicans in the county is very different.
Well,
So-
we'll go through
Okay.
some of those later on.
Thanks.
So in any case, this is overall strong level of support, just with people being asked the question without, having heard a lot of information about it necessarily. So here you have it, the breakdown, which is pretty interesting. It's pretty even across a lot of these things. So gender and age, keep going. There's your Democrats with very high level support among Democrats, and Republicans are pretty evenly split. Independents skew a little bit more away from it, but also a very interesting result. Another thing that was really helpful for us to get some answers to is that we know there's a high level of turnover in the county of people coming in, buying houses, leaving. And it's very hard for us to know, are we reaching these people, or how do they feel about what it is that we do? So that particularly those 0 to 5 and 6 to 10 year numbers are really quite interesting for us. It seems that people who are coming here are very, very overwhelmingly supportive of this kind of effort. And that decreases a little bit depending on how long you've lived here, interestingly. But go forward. So what they did in the survey was then provide people with some more information as they went along to see how it changed those results. So this was one of the things, just spelling out some of the things that the Land Bank has done, and also being sure to include the important fact that this is a conservation area real estate excise tax. It is not a property tax. There's always a lot of confusion about that issue. But go on to the next one. So after being provided with that information, the total number of folks who are in support of this actually goes up to 70% of the voters, and the no's drop from 33 to 27. So hearing more information about it makes the case a bit stronger for people, apparently. And then they were asked about particular priorities. So this is an interesting one. You know, what's most important to the general public for us to be working on in this area? And you can see this water quality, natural area, wildfire, wildlife habitat, those things really rise to the top. We can go on to the next slide. And then when we're talking about what you want, what else you want, what would you see us like to do going forward? You get some of these numbers where things that rise to the top are preserving working farms, managing property for outdoor recreation, conserving open rural landscapes, and maintaining hiking trails. It's interesting that the level of support drops a bit when you're talking about actually acquiring new properties or creating new trails. So the bottom here is mountain biking. I will note that even in that area, you've got over 50% of support for that measure. So it's just strong pretty much all the way through. But obviously those farms maintaining what we've got recreationally and maintaining open spaces and views certainly can rank pretty highly. Okay, next one. So after giving people positive information, they also provided them with a bit of negative information, things about, you know, tax, cost of a taxpayer, just general things that you associate, you know, a government program, and they wanted to test whether those negative messages that people will tend to hear and these kinds of things affect the overall level of support. So as you can see here at the initial level of support, 62%. After getting some preliminary information and positive messaging, it goes up to 70%. And hearing some of that negative information really does not do much to bring that level of support down. I will note that this is something of a generic survey, so they didn't get into specific issues around what the land bank might be doing or not. This is really about people's support for conservation measures, new acquisitions, and maintaining conservation areas. So the messaging in favor of the measure and what really seemed to resonate with people. So note this is ranked by very convincing. So it went across the scale of very convincing, somewhat convincing. So this is the people what you're seeing who are very think these things are extremely important. So future generations really ranked at the top of this list. Who pays? Again, that notion that this is not a property levy, it is a real estate excise tax, a one-time tax. Habitat is also extremely important. Water, special places, all of these things really just jumped off the page really in terms of people feeling they were extremely important. As we work our way down the list, one of the things that was interesting, certainly development is of concern to people, how much is happening, but less so than these others. And then the housing question, I thought this was particularly interesting given the fact that the conservation area REIT is required to be fully funded in order for the affordable housing REIT to be funded. And yet the numbers they're not jumping off the page on this one. It's definitely important to people, but less so than something like future generations or protecting wildlife habitat. And there you just see things broken down a bit more. So there's the dividing line that the consulting company put on there. They're noting just the drop between that special place number where it's very convincing to the development number where it goes from 40 to 34%. But you can see in all of these cases, the total numbers are really high, the future generations number being just pretty much off the chart. And who pays and habitat, you can see what issues people are really looking at as being extremely important. So these were their conclusions, basically that there's a broad level of support for continuing the real estate excise tax. It is important to note that there are other concerns in the community that people find extremely compelling, like ferry service, and affordable housing for sure. But they're also ranking these issues as extremely high as well. So all in all, it's a very compelling picture from this survey. So that's like inept effort to summarize.
So that was the presentation. The reason I asked, can I speak? The reason I asked Lincoln to bring this to us was partly because our mandate was written in 1989, probably, and I was interested to see how closely it was supported by a current poll. And some of the things that came out in the poll, there's a lot of concern about wildfire, protecting forests, improving forest health, which falls under the heading of environmental, of course. But at that time, wildfire was not a thing that we were concerned about. And one of the things that really did hit the nail on the head here is that we have protection of existing and future sources of potable water. And we can see that that is, that hit on a number of these different ways of looking at it, where we're talking about wetlands or streams or aquifers or whatever. So in some ways, I feel like this really supports the mandate, and in some ways that gives us an additional level of detail that falls within the mandate. But I'm not sure that people in the community understand what our stewardship team is doing, for instance, with forest health. And even me, it's hard to grasp unless I go out and see teams working on the properties. But that really was what I felt like we should at least recognize, is that there's been change over time, but there's also continuity in the values that we've expressed in our mandate. And I just want to make sure that we are, wherever these concerns fall within our purview, and of course the ferry system is not up to us, but that we are supporting those concerns within our mandate. That was my whole spiel. Thanks.
Yeah, it is interesting, particularly with regard to the affordable housing issue, which rises and falls. It's always going to be something that's of concern here. There is a kind of a nexus point between what we do and affordable housing, particularly with regard to the town of Friday Harbor, where we're thinking that most affordable housing projects will be going forward in and around that urban growth area. And largely because it's centrally located, they were able to make use of existing services that are provided. Well, one of those things is clean drinking water. And one of the things that we've done on San Juan is really work to protect the Trout Lake watershed, which is the town's drinking water supply. So we've purchased 20% of that watershed to eliminate the potential for development in the watershed area and enable them to better provide clean drinking water, giving them the potential for expanding that reservoir as necessary if they need to do that. Just a really good symbiosis there.
Just one thought in response to your comment, Marilyn. I think we have been doing a very good job of sharing public information on our, particularly our forest stewardship efforts, via volunteer things, via our stewardship reports, and a lot of pictures and information that we're putting out, but that is important. So I think we need to continue to emphasize it.
So it's interesting, I went to the presentation, the county presentation about preparing for emergencies. And Brendan Cowan did that presentation, and it was really interesting. He said, we're not really at risk for forest fires. I was surprised. He says our grasslands are much more high risk areas in terms of threat and devastation, but in terms of our forest, usually when a fire gets to the forest, it'll slow down. So that was interesting.
Is that our fire marshal?
They're there.
Director of Emergency Management.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I didn't hear what you said.
And then the fire chief was
Yeah.
there at that meeting as well. But I thought that was really interesting
Yeah.
feedback, especially in light of public concern for that, which I think is more based on mainland issues than what we've got going on here. But,
Well, don't forget Maui,
well, right.
you know what
now
I mean, where
that's
you
that.
had an electrical.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and there, I think we see that in Texas and stuff like that, where there's fires related to power grids.
Right.
And what I would add to that is, that's good. However, the situation is changing. And so one of the things we're seeing as we have hotter and drier summers is more mortality in our forests, more dead and dying trees. And with that, you've got lower soil moisture content. So the probability of having a larger wildfire incident in the forest is going to go up. And that's one of the reasons we've been trying to focus pretty intensively on managing the tree stands in our forests that are unhealthy. Got quite a lot of that out here where old fields were just let to revert to forest. And so you have many unhealthy trees that are going to tend to burn a lot easier than a healthy forest. If we get into those areas and we thin them, and we leave a healthy stand with also a much more biodiverse stand, because you'll have some of the native ground cover that's come back, or in particular, we've been working in the Gary Oak savanna areas. Gary Oak is a really important species, keystone species, provides a lot of habitat for other things, but maintaining those areas and ultimately potentially even introducing prescribed fire into some of the landscapes is going to be important, and more important over time. So we're lucky that we have a little bit of leeway. Don't have a lot. Things seem to be changing quite fast. So
Yeah, I agree with you. Because I've been concerned about our forest and fire hazard, but it was just interesting to hear his comment. So maybe we need to communicate with him and say, hey, Brendan. But anyway, separate from that.
Anybody else on that?
okay.
Okay, thanks, Lincoln. You want to continue with
Yes.
transactional analysis?
Yes. So we can skip past this. We've already done the land acknowledgement. I always put that in there. So
it's a nice
next
picture.
slide. Go back to that previous second slide. That one. Terrible picture. I took it with my phone. You might want to stop by the Driggs Park office. This is a shot of the meadow that we have going there, thanks to Eliza. Really pretty spectacular this spring, and an amazing option for people who are interested in having something other than a lawn. But please stop by. You know, we have people who stop by to pick lilacs when they're blooming. We invite them out there because there are a lot of lilacs around that yard. But also more and more we want them to take a look at this kind of thing, and we're going to be doing more native plantings around the office just to give people a better idea of possibilities. So just an aside.
The black plastic is gone.
No, we have it's successive blast.
I understand. Yep.
That area, which is beside the Driggs house, we did put plastic over that for some period of time, and now this is what's followed up. In the other part of the Driggs Park, we have other pieces of plastic. We're not putting in a bocce court. That's not what's happening.
Yeah.
No, but it will be turned into a native plant, basically demonstration.
We're doing that ourselves, and I'm glad to know that it's not only successful, but successful too. And
Yeah.
That's what you get.
Yeah, I really encourage you to take a first-hand look. One of the things I've given you in your packet is a couple of tables that we've been working on in a summary memo, really looking at this question of the values of our properties, appraised values when properties were purchased. There was a column in the table about taxable value, which is something that we use each year to go through that analysis of what might happen if you put our properties back on the tax rolls. But the primary focus of pulling that table together, which is all of our transactions from the beginning of the program, is to really look at that question of appraised value and what we've paid and what our partners have paid. And Brian called me yesterday. He had some questions, and I realized pretty quickly that I don't think that table is detailed enough. It's not ready for prime time. So I'm going to go back and work on it some more, but I'll show you one of the reasons why it's not as straightforward as it seems, because we have in our preserves, often there's the case that this is not just a single acquisition that's done, one and done. It's often takes place over a long period of time. So I wanted to just run through this example of Beaverton Marsh and how that project has unfolded over time, give you a clear sense of where we come down on this. What was the property worth? What did we pay? What have our partners put into it? Question. So we can go forward with this. That's the area of the Beaverton Marsh Preserve as it exists today. You can see Roach Harbor Road off to the right there and Beaverton Valley Road bounding it on the south, with Lindy Park off in that southeast corner, which is where we're working to make the connection from the park to the preserve. So next slide. This is where it started with an acquisition from Al Sundstrom in 2001. This is also highlights another interesting component. When the land bank first started working on this, the intention was to purchase a conservation easement on the property. But during the course of the transaction, he decided it did not want to do a conservation easement and preferred to sell the property outright. So that's what happened. All right, next slide. This was a tax deed sale, maybe a surveyor's error, not really sure. I think we spent all of $1,300 on this little 2-acre area, but that was the next step in this. Next one. Okay, in 2006, we purchased this 5-acre property. That's the outflow of the marsh. And one of the reasons we were very, very interested in getting this property is because at that time we were working with Ducks Unlimited, who had come up with some money to purchase a conservation easement over the marsh. And they were telling us at that point that being able to control the level of water in the marsh was extremely important. So having the outflow was a critical acquisition for us. That's why we did that. So next slide. This is the conservation easement that was purchased over the marsh using the Ducks Unlimited funds. It did not reduce the density of the overall property. It did prohibit subdivision of the marsh areas, and it did give us the ability to go in and proactively manage the marsh. That was the principal benefit of that conservation easement, which again, we didn't actually pay anything for. It was all Ducks Unlimited grant that came from the North American Wetlands Conservation Act. Okay, next slide. So this was a very westernmost piece that was purchased from the Buck family that ended up being the San Juan Preservation Trust Preserve. Forget what they call that, Beaverton Marsh West, something like that. In any case, that's now in their ownership. Next slide. So in 2019, or beginning in 2018, we were really fortunate. The rest of that property did come up for sale. It was marketed. We didn't figure we had any chance of acquiring it. And yet we had a conservation donor show up out of the blue. Actually, someone brought to us by Greg King, who was willing to donate a considerable amount of money to helping us purchase this property from the Taylor family. And so that's what we did. And we did it in partnership with the Preservation Trust. So they now have a conservation easement over that. Next slide. So, well, that's 2 and 1. Later in 2019, that little piece, it's about 3.5 acres, was donated by Mike Taylor. Kind of squares off that part of the preserve, but helpful for management purposes, certainly. And then in 2021, that key 5-acre piece in the very southeasternmost part of the preserve, we were able to get. Now, this is the same donor who gave us $750,000 to purchase the Taylor property, also purchased this 5-acre piece, recognizing that it was the linchpin. It's the connecting point between Lindy Park and the preserve. Now, obviously, we've got some physical problems with connecting in that we have to get across the neck of that marsh. But without this parcel, there was no hope of ever achieving that objective. So next slide. What does all this mean? We can look here at the appraised value of the properties as purchased in some cases. So that's number 2 and 3, you can see we used assessed value and not appraised value. But the appraised value, what we actually paid for the property, and what we got from what we paid, and what partners contributed. So the total appraised value for all 470 acres came out to around 4.6 million. The total purchase price, all funds combined, ended up being about 4.1. Again, that's because of our partners and because of these donors. So land bank funds, 2 million of that. So we basically paid half of it. With partner funds being significantly more than that. Some of that going toward managing it as well. But that's how a project like this breaks down. And it gives you some indication of if you go take a quick look at one appraisal of a piece of property that's in part of a project, it's not going to tell you the true story of what actually happened. But this is a good breakdown of why it can be a bit complicated. But in the end, this is a project that has certainly worked out extremely well.
And it's a real history of a conservation ethic.
Right. Yeah, these projects often take a long time. We have numerous projects that are in their 2nd decade. And we've got some projects, some conservation easement projects, which are intergenerational, where the first generation was not interested in working with us at all. It took a generational change to get the next generation of folks interested in actually doing conservation easement. So I'll be working more on this table, and I'll come back to you next time. But the next slide is where we are. Sorry, this was the highlight of those numbers. This is the summary slide, which I attached to the memo. These numbers might change a bit, but this is really how it is, how it stands at the end. with appraised value of properties of outright purchase being 83 million, with land bank expenditures and partner expenditures, that first line up there, being 82 million. So we, even with partner expenditures, spent less than appraised value. We also have these non-acquisition contributions. So that's things like the Turtleback Stewardship Fund, which the Preservation Trust had created. Not part of the actual transaction, but certainly going into a successful management regime. And you can follow that going all the way down through the conservation easements. A lot of those were donated, so we had to come up with an estimate of value for those, since when people are donating conservation easements, we don't necessarily see the value of the easement. That's not made available to us, so we had to estimate. In the end, between that and other projects which we participated on and facilitated, we're looking at this roughly 1-to-1 expenditure. So spending under appraised value considerably in land bank funds, and also really able to bring in a lot of external funding as well. So we'll revisit this. That's where we are at this point.
I think this is really helpful. And is it posted on the website?
No, not
Will it
yet.
be?
This is still in draft form. We keep going through these numbers, and as you can see from the Beaverton Marsh example, it requires confirming and reconfirming. And other acquisitions, it's a little bit more complicated. Zylstra Lake, for example, there's a purchase together with a preservation trust, with a deed of trust. There's a resale of property, then there's an additional purchase. There's a federal grant that went with it, which also required us to negotiate basically a conservation easement with the University of Washington over their False Bay property at no costs. That was probably the most difficult negotiation I've ever had, quite honestly. But again, it's just not that straightforward. Right. In the end, what you'll see is that we spent far less than appraised value for what we ended up getting.
Yeah, I can see that, but thank you for doing it.
Yeah. Anybody else? I think the summary table is very, very valuable. It really gives a snapshot of the big picture, and super valuable. Also, that just to tag on to Anne Marie's comment, your illustration of the Beaverton Marsh really shows, I think, so we get accused sometimes of being opportunistic rather than strategic. That shows a strategy over, 20 years? Yeah. And I like to say you have to be strategic in order to be opportunistic. Right. So it's very good. Okay, shall we take a 5-minute break? We're about 5 minutes behind, so let's come back at about 22 after. Zoom with the outreach and communications report, and then the stewardship report. And John is back. Hi.
Just making my little note here. Let's see. So for outreach, I'll report. You want me to report, Marilyn, on the committee?
Yes, please.
Okay. Mainly the communications subcommittee spoke about. We have been focusing on the strategies from the draft from the strategic plan and trying to go through those. And the last meeting, we focused on the last 3 on this page. So talking about the available activities and a broader audience, expanding volunteer program, and outreach and engagement activity. So some of the things that are reflected in the current and upcoming outreach events, and I can't remember, I think this is in the stewardship report, but working with a senior on Orcas with a senior project. Mary Brock's been Well, she volunteered, so she'll be the mentor on the ground and I'll be able to help with promotion and marketing. So hopefully it'll be an awareness program, maybe focused only at East Sound Waterfront Park or between there and Crescent Beach, but the senior was interested in awareness about trash. So taking on a leave no trace ethic, as well as perhaps incorporating with Myrtles, those little tiny microplastics at East Sound Waterfront Park. And I just happened to see that the Exchange is hosting a beach cleanup tomorrow. Microplastics, so that's really wonderful.
Tanya, when you talk about senior, you're talking about a senior in a high school.
Sorry.
Not a senior like me.
Yeah, Orcas Island High School senior for a senior project, yeah. And then I'll be at the Children's Festival tomorrow and San Juan Island. So that, I say that because that speaks to some of these, it's difficult as we've talked about getting into the schools because their programming is tight, but trying to coordinate with opportunities that come up within the community. So I think, you know, slowly we're getting in there, and I'll be working with the San Juan Island, the Island Rec Summer Camp. They have an opportunity on Wednesdays. They meet at the elementary school, which is less than an eighth of a mile from the land bank office. So we'll host educational events on Wednesdays for their Walking Wednesdays, and then work with maybe some other environmental agencies on those days too. So that's part of that piece, and a little bit of, I guess, upcoming schedule, volunteer events, trail building, a lot's happening at Katy Mountain, and then they'll focus, we'll go over to Beaverton to finish up. And we just recently had Bugs, what did we do? Bugs. We had an event with the Screen-Free Week, that's what it was, with the Family Resource Center. So there's just a lot happening. And if you have questions or suggestions, I'll send them my way. And the annual report, I think we talked about, looks like it'll drop in June, finishing that up.
Just one comment about working with schools. My thought when we put that goal into the strategic plan was that was a very difficult one because of just what you said. But I think we should remember that one way to do that is our continued support of the Youth Conservation Corps and Islands Conservation Corps. Even though that's somebody else's program now, I think it's important, and that we, and you particularly, highlight that in our communications.
Oh yeah, they are a huge part of, especially the Youth Conservation Corps, which comes through in the summer.
Yep.
Those kids, it's really made an impact.
We have totaled up the number of kids who passed through that program, and it's over 300.
Wow, that's great. Very important for the kids and the parents. Yeah. Okay. That it, Tanya?
I think so, unless there's questions.
Thank you. Okay, stewardship report. Who's doing it? Are we having the Ag Committee report? Charlie's here in the Ag Committee.
Nobody, and we can see where it goes from there.
Right.
Yeah, so wait till the table moves. Continuation of last month's discussion on egg leases out here on San Juan for the Fraser Homestead and the Beaverton Marsh Preserve. Got cut a little bit short last time, and more discussion to be had. We've also made some forward steps since then. We've given the two selected lessees, the Shepherds for Fraser Homestead and the Grange for Beaverton Marsh Preserve, short-term use of the property to get going on some preparations for the long term. So at Fraser, they're going to bring a small herd of cattle out to the property. So right now, just refencing the pond and getting the water system flowing. And yeah, just taking some early steps to get it usable. And at the Beaverton Marsh Preserve, we're working on some fencing at the land bank. Been hard at work all week. The WTC crew is doing some perimeter fencing replacement at the Grange. Roger, thanks for being here.
Thanks for doing the beautiful fencing.
Oh, thank you. It's a start. Yeah, so they've tarped off about a quarter acre, is it? Or they're working on that, which will be the initial growing site. And that is occultation, is the term for tarping, and killing off the sod to reduce tillage needs, and a creative way to weight down these tarps on a windy site. They've come up with cages filled with hay and soil, grow potatoes through the season. We don't have water quite hooked up with the solar pump, so they've begun hauling in water for now. Then the plant garlic in the fall.
Yes.
Yeah.
And other things that can overwinter.
Yeah. So baby steps to get rolling, some long coming land bank work on the property, fencing, major fence overhaul. So yeah, with the growing season here, I've had more time in the field the last couple of weeks than I have on this lease, but these draft leases, but we've been working on them. The Fraser lease, it's simpler, more in line with some of the standard grazing leases we've had in the past. Do some back and forth with the shepherds on that. And then haven't presented anything to the Grange yet, but been through it with the Ag Lease Committee once for initial review and some edits to make there before we go back again and look at it again before we have something for Roger and his team. So anything to add from the Ag Commission before we jump into any questions and discussion?
Well, I'll just say that when we were looking at the Beaverton Marsh lease, I think what we were all working on trying to do was to make sure that it was really, we would avoid kind of those gray zones and clarify kind of exactly what the expectations were a little bit more. So it was fruitful. And I imagine there'll be quite a bit of back and forth for a while.
And it will help us a lot to clarify gray zones. Yes.
And there will be plenty of gray zones with a long-term kind of loose vision, many directions it could take, and infrastructure potential. But I think we're going to try and find a common ground where we can, look at each of these projects as they come, commit to a certain level of improvements like fencing and water systems. But when you have these larger, big ticket items, that we kind of take them as they come, that it'll be a negotiation through the process, and land bank not necessarily committing to all of these things right off the bat, but we'll come together. And so far, the way communication has been laid out in the process, I feel very confident in working with this committee and whoever the point people are. So that's some of the background.
Okay. Committee members, anything else? I guess Mike do you have your hand up, Mike, or? Okay, no. What are we looking at as a timeline for commission discussion and consideration of the lease?
So it's a bit of an organic process with land bank process, and the Grange has their own process for review. So hopefully in the next couple months we'll have something solid to look over.
Okay. I know operations are rolling already before we have a lease, so I'd just like to make sure it's coordinated in some way.
Once we have it, the process just to have it all signed off by all the people and John folks review it takes some time. So we're probably looking at fall before we have a signed off lease in reality. So having this letter of agreement in the interim helps that process, and we're all, I think, on board with not jumping in full steam. That's kind of the nature of this project. It's slow progression, building, looking at the resources, and
recognizing that this is a complicated deal and one that we haven't entered into before. I think it's good to feel our way through it and discuss it thoroughly. When you do the presentation of the commission, I for one would like to see a map so that I understand better the physical layout of what's going on, not only where it is in Beaverton, but the layout of the farm parcel and what's intended to be where.
Yeah, that'll all be in there, and you're welcome to come out to the site, and I'll show you my fence post.
Good. Thanks. Okay.
Yeah, it's gonna be a beautiful, beautiful site. Yeah, it's really fun to see some fresh energy there, and the traffic's picked up a lot in the last couple weeks. Usually in the winter, I can wave at almost every car, but I gave up this last week. But no cars off the road. That's good. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments?
I noticed that the fence is set back from the road for much further than it had been in the past.
Yep.
Just wondered what the thinking was.
Yeah, so a couple reasons, not cars coming over off the road, they'll still run into the fence. The concept of a potential trail along the roadside is part of that. Also to be able to maintain fence lines. There's also a setback from the marsh about at least 50 feet from what it used to be. So that's a grassy buffer with also the ability to maintain that strip. So there's multiple reasons for it. A lot of times we don't pull fences away from their historic lines. Usually there's a lot of hawthorn and rose to remove. We don't want to keep moving the fence in every 10 feet, every 20 years. But sometimes there's a good reason for that. So on the western side, I've also pulled it in both the Central Trail connection into the rest of the Beaverton property, which is just a loose concept at this point. But also there's a ditch just on the neighbor's property that needs a little bit of a buffer and a nice hedgerow with small heirloom apples.
It's nice to see the neighbors really making something of that side as well.
Yep, and I met them for the first time yesterday, and they're very ambitious, excited to be farming, and
Not going on.
be good neighbors.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, thanks, Charlie.
Yeah, you bet.
Now, who is presenting the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation grant application?
I'll be doing that. I don't know if there are other stewardship things that we want to touch on before we go to that item.
I have a few thoughts just related to conversation earlier, attending the April 30th presentation by Trust for Public Land. Some things that stuck out for me with that was how some of the phrases with acquiring new properties was linked to accommodating increased use. And I kind of wondered how that would play out if it was accommodating new properties to protect water or wildlife with those resources that, or those other conservation values that ranked really high. So I kind of wanted to think about that. I agree with Marilyn that we are doing a lot of the work, and Lincoln mentioned the work up at Mount Grant with the town, but also linking forest health work all over and protection of forests. So I think we have 26 intermittent streams that originate on Turtleback. It's a pretty big watershed. A lot of our water is surface water. So keeping healthy forests links to our water quality and protection. We mentioned, or Lincoln mentioned also kind of the, I think, cessation of prescribed fire and colonizing fields. You know, a lot of our forests are also unhealthy because of widespread logging. And we lost some of our older trees, which are the most resilient to fire. So, you know, linking our work not only to reducing an immediate risk of catastrophic fire, but trying to cultivate older trees, give them space, access to water so they're not as competitive, is a long-term gain in terms of fire resilience and communities. And then I think the last thing, I think that's probably it. But yeah, I just want to be really careful about how we present wildfire, our risk, and the integration of these values, which I think are incredible that, you know, the Trust for Public Land uncovered, and what we do related to that. And then I think just cautioning against recreational amenity growth, because I think we saw that really clear. It's not a driver for protecting lands. Anyways. it's a great discussion.
You make some good points, Aaron. I think we're doing a lot of work that still really isn't being, captured and put out to the public. And I was, in terms of water resources, particularly that what you mentioned about the intermittent streams on Turtleback. I know that Peter is doing a lot of work on preserving natural groundwater absorption in some of our farmlands. And I would guess some of the other stewards probably are too. Also beaver dams. We haven't really talked a lot about that stuff that I've seen, and they're all interesting stories. Good stuff to share with the public. So
Yeah.
good points.
I think we get them out there, but yeah, we can always do more. It's so hard to get names out.
Okay. I guess that's all the stewards we have here.
Well, before we close out this discussion, I just want to comment on the Richardson Marsh Preserve report management plan that Amanda did, and it's really well done. So I just want to make sure everybody thanks her for that.
Okay, Lincoln.
All right, so the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation grant. This is kind of, this application is stemmed out of something I've been trying to do over the last maybe 6 or 9 months. I've been working with a consultant really to try and figure out ways to help fund our stewardship activities. In particular, these larger landscape scale activities, which tend to be very expensive. And so she talked to all the stewards on staff and came up with some ideas. And this grant came along. Paul G. Allen is still kind of a forming foundation, honestly. They've been around for a while, but I think they're newly crystallizing around some particular issues. And one of them is natural climate solutions. So they introduced this new grant category with a funding pot of about $5 million back in February. And we talked a lot about how it might be possible for the land bank to fit into something along these lines, because it's certainly consistent with some of the things that we've been doing. And we decided to go ahead and actually submit the grant proposal. So what this is all about basically is really trying to add capacity to our existing efforts with regard to forest thinning of unhealthy stands, which we've already talked about a little bit today, and really getting that to a larger scale. So there is the funding available to try and accomplish that. We've also been working a lot with other agencies on that effort and really trying to find additional resources, which it's seeming like the Department of Natural Resources is going to be quite helpful. So money that they bring to the table should enhance money that we might get through this grant to really enhance those efforts. Part of this is trying to build capacity for the Salish Seeds program. They've been wanting to add a greenhouse to really expand their ability to grow plants. So we put some funding in there for that, also for additional seasonal help. Since we've had some of our stewardship folks helping out with Salish Seeds, the hope is that maybe we can shift them maybe toward doing other work and having some people dedicated to the nursery operation. There are other things in here. One of the things that's quite interesting in doing this work and has been this notion that we really want to find a way to do something significant on this question of climate change. And it's extremely difficult being so localized and also being an archipelago with the challenges that we face. one of the things that I really have been pushing for a couple of years now is this question of enhanced rock weathering. So what that's all about is the fact that some silicate rocks, and particularly the rock we're talking about is basalt, when they're ground, actively absorb carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. In addition, when they're applied to agricultural lands, they have the effect of fertilizing, not in a bad way. This basically would supplant the need to put lime down on fields. So it's basically alkaline, it's deacidifying and adding calcium back into the soil, which as it works its way through the system into the marine environment has the impact of deacidifying the marine environment, one of our main concerns. So by working with this consultant, we ended up talking with a researcher from Yale who has his own program on these efforts, and he's very interested in working with us. And so we're hopeful. This has got quite a lot of hurdles to overcome, but really hopeful that we can barge over a considerable amount of basalt onto San Juan, not just to do some test projects, but also to extend over a much larger area, including on private properties, potentially up to a couple of 100 acres. So all of that will be pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, fertilizing those fields, just having real benefits. And so that looks like we have a good chance of happening even without this grant, just funded through this researchers program. With the grant, it'll expand it quite a bit and see what we can do. So we've got some money in there for equipment, for some personnel, expansion of personnel. A lot of this, though, is about tying this together with other climate efforts that are going on around the Salish Sea. So there are a variety of things happening. It's pretty amazing. Another researcher has started a company that's actually extracting carbon dioxide out of the air as part of seawater filtration processes. Like if you have an aquaculture operation, you're basically extracting the carbon dioxide, and the water you discharge is less acidic. So that's another piece. They're not a direct partner on this, but we do have a number of partners, including the Preservation Trust, Friday Harbor Labs. The Salish Sea Modeling Center is an organization which is really set up to actually measure direct impacts on the Salish Sea of some things you're doing. And we're years down the road, I think, before we start to see some of these signals present themselves. But we can, another big piece of this grant will be to have people actually looking at areas where we put basalt down and see, measuring specifically, what is happening in terms of pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And for the work that we're doing now and with thinning and producing biochar, there's part of this is to enhance our efforts to create biochar more efficiently. So we've got money in there for more efficient kilns. But the big part of this is to really start measuring, to see what kind of impact we're having and connect that to these other efforts. And the hope here is that if we can do something significant in a place like this, where it's difficult, we're a rural county, we're an archipelago, don't really have a lot of resources, but if we can do something truly significant here, then it's pretty obvious this can happen elsewhere. And we've sure got a lot of silicate rock in Washington State. I think we're pretty much the leader in the nation. A lot of this stuff is a byproduct of people making gravel or doing other operations. It's basically just sitting around waiting to be used. So hopefully we can get this grant, get all this stuff off the ground, really make some waves with it, and spawn some probably much larger efforts on the mainland. So we can really start to see how, wow, you know, even at a local level, we can actually address this issue of climate change.
Would the basalt work actually happen on the island?
Yes.
So the crushing of it?
No, it'll arrive crushed on a barge. One of our big things is the logistics of, we can get it to a barge landing, getting it from a barge landing probably to a storage area, to a site, finding farmers to work with us. Roger?
Yes.
That's another question, but you know, basically it should be very attractive to people because it's kind of like providing free augmentation of their soil. A lot of work to be done to make it a reality.
So how long would it be before we got some measurable results?
Well, I think we'd have immediate measurable results based on the things that we've been doing. We've already started measuring. One of the ICC, Islands Conservation Corps crew people, as part of her master's thesis, is looking at the biochar work that has happened on our property, actually on Mount Grant and on Turtleback, to measure, well, how many tons of carbon are we actually locking up in this process? So she's making an effort to quantify this. This will bump it up to a whole new level of lots of very excited researchers running around, wanting to talk about climate and carbon and all that stuff. So,
but within our lifetimes.
Definitely.
My lifetime.
No, definitely. You'll see,
okay.
We'll be able to measure actual amounts of carbon being withdrawn, carbon dioxide being withdrawn pretty easily. That the big question to my mind is, I mean, it's much harder to see impacts on the overall atmosphere, obviously.
Yeah.
The next step would really be, as this gets into the marine systems, you know, we'll be able to measure that. That's part of why the Salish Sea Modeling Center and the labs are signed on to this, just so we can really start to see that signal when it happens.
Is there a place for the conservation district in that?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, they're definitely one of our partners as well. So one of the things they're doing in concert with us on this effort is working with this new Guardians program, which has been started by the Northwest Indian College to really train Native Americans across different tribes to work in resource management. And so we can get a group of those folks here to work on some of these efforts as well. So it'll enhance our ability to work with the tribes and take that to a new level.
Is there a chance of some of these going to other islands, or is that really?
Talk to me later.
Okay.
I don't know. There's so many logistical details to work through, but that will be the ultimate goal. Yeah, to get it across the archipelago. If you've got a good barge landing site, let me know.
Oh yeah.
Hey, Lincoln, this is great. This is a very exciting project, and it's massive. I mean, this is has impact beyond our shores, which I think is great. It's also good for our community to be a leader in some of these areas. So I commend you in that, and I volunteer my farm as a private test lab for your basalt project. So keep that in mind.
All right. We'll be there next week.
All right. I'll give you the gate. Let me give you the gate code.
Okay.
if that's all with the presentations, I think we've arrived at, I promised a second public comment period. And looks like yes,
May I
please.
comment in the public comment?
Absolutely.
Roger Ellison, President of San Juan Island Grange. And I'm here for a couple of reasons. One is to thank Charlie and his fabulous WCC crew. The fencing looks terrific and it's a really good beginning. And I hope our relationship can last for well beyond our lifetimes. And Lincoln, this notion of the rock powder makes me want to say that part of the impetus of this commons is to test ideas on the ground, test really good regenerative agricultural ideas. So there's a test plot for you at our place.
Excellent.
And we also want to serve as a model. So hopefully ideas will be tested here at Old Marsh Commons that will entice other growers, commercial and private, to try out those ideas and just spread them. What else can I tell you? There is a work party on Sunday, 1 to 3. We're going to spread more tarps, hopefully kill off more sod, create more potato bins, basically potato beds. And you're all invited. 1 to 3 at the site. We already have a insurance in place. We've got our insurance agent to put a rider for that project. So you can come and hurt yourself. Are there any voters in the room?
Yes.
Okay, any questions? I just invited people to come and hurt themselves.
Yes.
No, come and participate. Be careful about hurting yourself or hurting the land.
So you don't mind if they hurt themselves, you don't fall.
And the fencing job you do not see is the several dump loads of old fencing that came out of the marsh and on the roadside that, yeah, well, I was trying to keep up with the WCC crew. They were yanking fencing. Okay, I wore them out. They didn't know the Eagles song. Desperado. No. Guess I'm getting old too.
And come back around.
Oh,
You've been out riding fences for far too long.
All right. Thank you, Roger. And I don't believe there's any further members of the public here. Mike?
Yeah, comment before we retire. There's Norris left a couple of notes in the chat. And I think we don't have to address, I don't want to address them today, but I think the group, the staff ought to take a look at those and see if there's something that we should discuss next month.
Good. Yeah.
I have those copied, Mike, and I'll pass them on.
Yeah, I think those will be educational and helpful for us.
That's right.
Okay, good. Thanks, Mike. And I failed to recognize earlier that Peter Guizet is here back from France, I guess. And I didn't recognize you during the stewardship report. I don't know whether you want to tell us about stewardship in France. Welcome back.
They do a lot of things very well in France.
Yeah.
I'll just say that, but it's nice to be home.
Yeah.
And I don't really have anything to add, except that Tyler did a great job of managing everything on Orcas in my absence. So thanks to him. And Mary Gropp was also involved. So that was nice.
And we have some events coming up next week, so I'll talk to you next week. Look forward to it. Okay, with that, unless
Amanda is here as well. Peggy just mentioned.
Oh, okay. Amanda, I'm sorry. I didn't see your picture on the screen. Anything you'd like to share?
Hi everyone. I don't have much to share. I'm getting ready. I'll do the Lopez Farmers Market tomorrow. It's the first opening. And things are going well in Lopez. It's been great to have Cedar Charnley on board. Yeah, it's been really helpful.
Great. Okay, and I don't know whether you were here and heard Peggy's comment about the stewardship plan.
Yes, I was. Thank you, Peggy.
Okay.
And also thank you to Erin Helcom, who also helps pull the management plans together.
And we thank you. Okay, with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.